February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, so we thought it would be a good topic to discuss, not only because it's super important, but it's also not really talked about because it can be a little bit uncomfortable recognizing teenage relationships and then also recognizing that they have real problems. So, just a little introduction about what we do at Voices, and I'm going to try to do this quickly because I know we only have like 20 or so minutes. But the first, usually, point of contact is our hotline. We provide 24/7 support, information referral services, and advocacy. And then our legal services coordinator, Kendall, can help people out with RFA processes, any court proceedings, and then she also attends the RFA, which is relief from abuse order, hearings every week. We have a shelter, Lori's house, and then if our shelter is full, we have a referral process with economic services to get people put into hotel rooms. We have a family services coordinator who works closely with DCF and with the kids who are staying in our shelter. We have a transitional housing program, and we also do systems advocacy, which is kind of two-parted. One of them is working with the actual systems that survivors access, so legal systems, medical, schools, and then also prevention work that creates that systemic change and culture shift that's so important to ending violence. So our approach is trauma-informed, which I'm sure everyone's heard that before and kind of has an idea of what that means. Survivor-centered, which means that we kind of meet people where they're at. We never push anyone to do anything or ask them to leave the relationship if they don't want to. Really taking cues from them and what they want to do and then supporting them to attain those goals. And then system change, which I said before. And I also just included the pyramid of needs because we really work from the idea that people's basic needs have to be met before they can take any other steps around their safety or psychological safety. I know that is spelled wrong on the bottom, but it's supposed to say physiological. So, for stats people, I don't really resonate with these, but I know it's super important to people, so I will read them. 1 in 3 teens experiences dating violence. It affects 1.5 million teens annually. LGBT teens are disproportionately affected. Does anyone have any idea of why that might be? Shannon?
I don't, probably because people that are on the LGBT spectrum are more vulnerable to experiencing violence because a big piece of it is the systems that they interact with. A lot of the work that we do as advocates is making sure that the systems they're going to interact with to meet their needs is going to be a safe resource. Mm-hmm. So that's an extra layer. And also just the way that the rigid gender roles in society tells us to be in a relationship is different with LGBTQ. They often experience power and control dynamics that are because of rigid gender roles. So, for example, if someone identifies as a different pronoun and their partner refuses to use that pronoun, there's like a lot of different violence that we might not understand as a whole. So it is now, especially when people are becoming more open and more safe with their sexuality and gender, people are feeling like there's still a lot of disconnect between what LGBT teens experience and what cisgendered straight teens might experience.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. So 81% of parents, this is shockingly high, believe that teen dating violence isn't an issue and would not talk about it. And the citations for these statistics are on this sheet that you can access after the presentation. So clearly it is an issue given these high prevalence, but unfortunately parents and therefore schools who are affected by what parents want are not providing the prevention work that we need to end this violence. So this is the teen power and control wheel, which is what I passed around. So the dynamics of an abusive relationship in teenagers are kind of similar to in an adult relationship. The relationship doesn't start out as abusive, it escalates. Maybe it starts as kind of an attitude of like, I love you, spend all of your time with me, don't spend time with anyone else, why are you talking to them? Kind of jealousy and intensity masked as falling in love. But then abuse can quickly escalate, and then you see more of these power and control tactics coming out. So the person who's using violence uses these tactics to maintain power and control over the survivor of the violence. So these are, or we think of them as intentional tactics that someone uses on purpose. So then, I don't know if so isolation is one of the big pieces of this power and control wheel, and that's also one of the big reasons why it's so difficult to get out of an abusive relationship, especially for a teenager whose support network might be a little bit looser. So the partner is isolating you, and then also fear of the partner, and then fear of judgment or disbelief if you seek support and try to leave are just some of the factors that would keep a teenager in an abusive relationship. Oh, also, I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end about technology, but that's obviously a really important aspect of teenage relationships and young adult relationships. So although it's really great to always be connected, it can also make it much more difficult for someone to feel safe in a relationship because you have constant monitoring of whereabouts. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Snap Maps. So Snapchat, you can basically see all of your Snapchat friends' locations on a map. You can see if they're standing next to each other and talking to each other. You can see if they're listening to music. You basically have a visual representation of, it's really alarming, of where everyone is at all times. So that can, I guess teenagers like it, but it can also be used as a monitoring device.
And you can turn it off.
You can turn it off, yeah.
Because I was like, I checked that. But
Yeah, you can turn off like your location services.
most parents don't know that.
Yes.
They think like, what?
Thank you. Revenge porn is also something that teenagers now have to deal with when they didn't really, it's a new thing. Does anyone know what that means? Does anyone want to share what that means?
Using photographs, maybe nude photographs or other sexually explicit that have been obtained during the course of the relationship. After the relationship ends, to shame.
Yes, exactly. So that said, using naked or explicit pictures that are sent consensually during the relationship as kind of blackmail or sharing them to shame the other person. So that's a new thing that we're dealing with, and it's a really common tactic used to maintain power and control over a partner in a teen relationship. But not all hope is lost. This is a picture from Lady Bird, which is an excellent movie if anyone wants to watch it. So if a teenager comes to you with these problems, first of all, great job, because it's really impressive that they trust you and feel comfortable enough to talk to you about such an intimate issue, especially as a teenager, because they can kind of smell judgment from a mile away, and if you can be that non-judgmental support person, then that is really important and amazing. And just a quick YRBS side note, youth want more askable adults. We don't really know what that means right now. The network is the Domestic and Sexual Violence Network is starting a campaign to ask students what an askable adult is. but if a teen comes to you, that means that to them, you're an askable adult, and that's awesome. And our current understanding of what an askable adult is has to do with empowerment and non-judgment. So if a teenager comes to you, it's really difficult, but try to practice non-judgmental listening. Especially hard if you really love this person, if it's your kid, and all you want to do is keep them safe. It's hard to hear them talk about being hurt without jumping and taking a lot of space in the conversation, reacting emotionally. It's not easy to do, but trying to let them take up more space, asking questions, hearing their side of the story, and validating their experiences rather than saying, why are you doing that? Just leave. And that applies to people of all ages. If it's safe to do so, you can offer them options instead of telling them what to do. So when I was at BFA Fairfax recently, I was talking to some sophomores, and one of them said that she wished that this person that she turned to for support didn't say, just go break up with him, because when inevitably she wasn't able to do that, then she lost that adult as a support person because she felt like, I'm disappointing them because I wasn't able to do this thing that they told me to do. So it's important to say, like, you could do this, you could do that, here are these resources, I will be here to support you in your decision. What you're going through is not easy. Just supporting them in their different options to empower them. If you have to do mandated reporting or any legal proceedings, I'm sure many of you have had experience with mandated reporting and the teenager kind of being upset about that. But the only thing you can really do in that instance is transparency and validation. So allowing them to be a part of the process, explaining your side of the story, why you feel a responsibility to do this, and validating their emotions even though you two maybe aren't on the same page. Or you are on the same page, but the law says that you have to have this responsibility to mandate a report. And you can connect them with services. So Voices is available 24/7. If people want to call anonymously, they don't have to share their age, and they can just talk about their relationship without fear of mandated reporting. So they can call the hotline and do so. And then we can also help with, like I said, legal proceedings and all that. Prevention, which is equally as important. Teach safe and healthy relationship behaviors. So from a young age, like as soon as they can walk and talk, empathy, boundaries, bodies, respect, and consent are pillars of creating a world where relationships can thrive and be healthy. And those concepts develop at a really young age, so it's important to notice those and nurture those, and so that the kids can apply them later on in their romantic relationships. Create protective environments. So as a whole, supporting parents and caregivers to thrive so that they can support their kids and model healthy relationships. So this is a huge issue to tackle, but making sure people have access to jobs, childcare, healthcare, all of that huge systemic change that needs to happen to create this foundation where relationships can thrive. Teach adults how to have conversations with kids about sexuality and relationships. It's kind of uncomfy, but we can do it, and Voices can provide training as well if parents are interested, or caregivers, schools, all of that. And that, I don't know where the Wholesome Bodies thing ended up. Yeah, so that is the Vermont Network curriculum for talking to kids about sexuality for parents.
This is different than the Beyond the Talk training?
I don't know that one. I think so. Yeah, that was developed by the network, and it.
Been around for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris would know more about this. But yeah, you can leaf through it. It has a bunch of great information and activities for adults that can kind of be translated into conversations with children. And then also encouraging schools as a parent, as a community partner, to implement prevention curricula for children, not just teenagers. I think there's a misconception that this is a topic that comes in in middle or high school, but in reality it comes in a lot earlier. So voices, by voices I mean me because we have a small team, can come into schools and implement, we're trained in the Care for Kids, We Care Elementary, and Safety curricula, which span from pre-K to the end of high school. So yeah, if you have any interest in bringing one of these curriculums into your school, or having a training for your workplace, or having a parent night, anything, we are down to talk about it. So yeah, and that's it. Does anyone have questions? Shannon?
I was thinking when you were doing the presentation too, with the staff that you all work with, if there's any situations where you are interacting with survivors and you want to know the best ways to serve them, we could also create trainings that are based on the need that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Does substance use fall into this?
That's a great question. I knew someone was going to ask that as I was sitting at the table. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, just, I guess it goes deeper into sort of more of a mental health as well as substance use, area. And I can't elaborate on, if they're doing this specific, drug or have this specific mental health issue, but where as you are in a relationship, from a dependency standpoint, whether or not it's an emotional dependency or a pharmacological.
Yeah.
Is there research at the teen level? I mean, I know that there seems to be research at more of the adult population.
Right. I'm not sure about the research. I'm assuming that the same. Do you mean like if someone is dependent on a certain substance, then the abusive partner can use that to control them?
That's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, we see that a lot, and I believe that it would trickle down or apply to younger populations as well. And then in terms of mental health, we usually think about the trauma that precedes and comes after an abusive relationship. Yeah, so they're definitely intertwined in many ways.
Yeah, I think, substances are used as one of the things that abusers use to overpower and control someone. So if they're providing that, that person is more likely to stay with them because they have that supply going. It's just one way that they can do that. On the other hand, sometimes teens and adults use substances to numb the trauma that they're experiencing and numb the abuse that they're experiencing. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and another thing that I just thought of is not only, if you look at the power and control wheel, sexual violence is part of that, so substances can also be used to facilitate sexual violence against a partner, which becomes part of the power and control tactics. Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether the sort of the public nature of social networks that kids are using also act as a preventative. In other words, there's more exposure for perpetrators and so on.
Interesting.
Protective features in.
Yeah. I mean, speaking as a youth, I think that definitely I've seen. It's hard to say whether it's good or not because it kind of falls under call-out culture, which is just when you say, like, I know this person is an abuser, and you share that information, but there's no reparations or restoration afterwards. So that's one thing that I've definitely seen is like lists or like Facebook pages that kind of just call people out as unsafe, but I don't really see any follow-through after that. And I can't think of any, and like I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about technology and its effects on social health, but I think it's a two-sided coin because on the one hand you are so connected, but is it real connection? Is it face-to-face? Is it touching, hugging, emotional? understanding, maybe not, but I think a lot of teenagers are more inclined to reach out for help through like texting hotlines and texting their friends, because it's a lot easier for them than it is to have that face-to-face discussion that would be so difficult and emotionally jarring. So, long story short, I don't know the answer. Yeah.
When it comes to substance use, you're right, that people do use it as a tool, just like any other product you peddle, whether it's food, housing, whatever. But I also know that the correlation between shame and addiction is incredibly high, and that will also play into those relationships. But I think my question for you is when you're doing your curriculum, whether it's before or after, I think what I think about is that these are situations that are created by like people's previous life circumstances. All the circumstances lead up to these kind of dynamics, good, bad, or indifferent. But I guess what I think is when I look at reducing this from a prevention standpoint, the importance of having a restorative lens on it, where we're healing those relationships, reducing shame, and building social connection. Because whether you're an abuser or a victim, I don't like to use that word because I feel like it loses power.
Survivor,
a person in recovery from that. Those are all vital pieces, and so do we demonstrate that and practice that to our very young children?
Right.
The fact that you said pre-K, I constantly say, like, as I sit here with our curriculum that starts in fifth grade for prevention, I go, we're really actually about 13 years too late.
Right,
so
exactly.
How do we do that? But from a restorative practice, so that we are changing the culture rather than increasing the number of people we incarcerate for these crimes, and subsequently the number of people who are then working towards recovery. So
and I think I'm glad that you mentioned restorative practice, because a lot of people we work with don't want to see their abuser get into trouble or be put in jail or get expelled or any of that. They just want reparations to be made. And I think that it's really great to see that shift in our movement from call-out culture and shame and blame to accountability and reparation. Not saying that anyone should have their violent behavior be excused, but learning and restoring and fixing that behavior and making changes so that everybody can have safe and healthy relationships.
I think that the people who cause the harm need part of reducing that harm and the impact. So everybody has to be involved in that.
Sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to add, yesterday I was fortunate enough to attend an event at UVM called Breakfast of Champions, Men Moving Vermont Forward, and the featured speaker was Ted Bunch from A Call to Men. The event was sponsored by Change the Story and the Vermont Women's Fund and the Vermont Commission on Women. And I was lucky enough, our new executive director paid for all the men in Vermont adult learning to attend the event, which had over 400 people.
That's awesome.
The thing that was most startling, I guess alarming to me as a takeaway, was Ted Bunch's organization did a survey of thousands of men, and young men from all over the country, across socioeconomic lines, across racial lines, and they found only 19% of men and young men were able to give a reasonably accurate definition as to what consent was. So we have a long way to go as far as the education and prevention piece goes.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting because people know what consent means when you're talking about anything but sex, pretty much. But then once you shift the topic, then for some reason it becomes blurred by like social expectations, gender roles, misinformation, all of that stuff that makes it less clear to people than it should be.
I also think when we think about that 19%, there are some women's changing roles seem a lot more fluid, like, oh, we're changing, we're growing, we're this, but when you think about men, they're in some ways seated that sort of like knight in shining armor, and if you get off that white horse, you know, it's very rigid, and I don't want to say not changing, but I would say very slow to change. That I think about dads who are staying home, you know, and moms are going to work. Those kinds of roles that it's almost like underground, but yet you know, they're fantastic. But I think some of that plays in. It's like, you know, there's an expectation that, you know, as men, there's a picture that you give yourself, but also as a society do, that makes it that much more difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's why a holistic feminist movement that works is going to tackle gender roles of all types, not just women's gender roles.
Ideally from a place of healing.
But I think that's a lot of what Ted Bunch's work is really thinking about the way we define masculinity in society and challenging some of those historical definitions or components of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.